Universal has been among the largest movie studios for over a century. I could literally spend the rest of this video just listing off hit movies that they put out, but nobody wants that. So just to give you an idea, I'm gonna name a few of the more notable franchises. We have Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, The Fast and the Furious, and Despicable Me are all Universal Pictures. All you have to do is look out for that iconic globe animation before the movie starts to tell you if they were part of it or not, but I'm guessing that any frequent movie viewer has already seen that thing hundreds of times. It is a massive company that has been a part of most of our lives, so I thought it would be interesting to take a look back at their evolution while highlighting the impact of their 9 different owners over the years. Carl Laemmle is the founder and, logically, the first owner of Universal. I would describe him as a daring businessman who is a perfect example of one of those American dream type stories. He came to the US from Germany in the late 1800s. He couldn't speak English when he arrived, and after spending about a decade in a series of low-paying jobs, he finally settled into a position working for a clothing retailer based in Wisconsin. That's where he spent the next 10 years or so, starting as a bookkeeper, but eventually getting involved in their advertising and even their management. By 1906, he was approaching 40 years old, and he had saved enough money to start his own business. I think that the initial plan was to go down to Chicago and start some kind of a clothing retail store similar to the one that he had worked at, but once he got there, that plan changed. This happened to be right at the time when Nickelodeon theaters were becoming popular. There were these 5-cent little theaters that you could easily go in and watch some kind of a movie. Carl Laemmle took notice of how much business they were getting and thought maybe it'd be a better idea to invest his money in the emerging film industry. So he wasted no time in opening one of the first movie theaters in Chicago called the White Front Theater, quickly followed by a second one called the Family Theater. He went on to start what became a major film distribution company and, of course, a production company. In 1909, it was originally called the Independent Motion Picture Company, but after only 3 years, it merged with 5 others and was given the name Universal, with Carl Laemmle being the main owner and president of it. 2 years after that, he opened the famous Universal City in Hollywood, California, where to this day, they continue to make their movies. Now, there is so much I could say about Carl Laemmle and how much he and his company helped shape the film industry. I recommend you look further into it because I don't want to get too sidetracked talking about him, but just a few examples. He challenged Thomas Edison's patents for the cameras and all the technology used to make the movies. At the time, pretty much everyone had to pay Edison to use them, but Laemmle was part of these antitrust lawsuits that he ultimately won at the Supreme Court level. His European operations were significant, specifically in his home country of Germany during the wars. He even helped create some of the first movie stars by promoting them as the centerpiece and the main reason to see the movies. Throughout those early years, the entire film industry continued to grow, and Universal was right there growing with it. They had developed a bit of a reputation for putting out these short, lower quality, budget type films, but by the 1930s, they made an effort to improve that image by investing more money into their productions. And the result of that was some classic films. In 1930, they won Best Picture with their movie All Quiet on the Western Front, and the following year, they started putting out their popular line of monster movies. I'm talking about these black and white classics like Dracula and Frankenstein, which, looking back, I'm glad they exist, but in a way, they helped lead to the company's first downfall. Not necessarily the movies themselves, but that mentality that went into making them, because it turns out that investing more money into bigger productions may not have been the best strategy going into the Great Depression. Not to mention they were also transitioning to talking pictures, which required a big investment in new equipment. The bottom line is that they were putting a lot of money into the business and not seeing enough return from it. Specifically, the movie Showboat was harmful. Carl Laemmle's son was producing it, it got too expensive, and they were forced to take out this big loan from a company called Standard Capital. I don't know the exact terms of that loan, but when Laemmle was unable to pay it back, he was forced to sell them all of Universal. It was a sad ending for him. From what I could tell, he did not want to separate from the company, and then he ended up dying 3 years later. So back to my list, the second owner was the provider of that loan, Standard Capital, who actually did a pretty good job in turning things around. They cut those production budgets, which quickly helped make the company profitable again. They went by the new name New Universal and relied on hit characters like Abbott and Costello to star in their movies. In fact, I think this is funny, that led to a series of movies that paired those characters with their popular monster characters, which I have to say is a pairing that works way better than I would have thought. Plus, World War II helped raise movie ticket sales in general because it was so stressful for everyone and they just wanted to go to the movies and forget about everything. And then shortly after the war, they scaled up by merging with another production company called International Pictures. So after that recovery, the next new owner was in 1952 when they were bought by Decca Records. It was a popular British record label that was behind the records put out by people who starred in Universal movies. So it was that media connection that made the merger make sense. This is where Universal was first connected to music in a big way. I don't have much else to say about this one because just 10 years later, in 1962, all of Decca Records was bought by MCA. Now, MCA is interesting because they were known for being a talent agency representing some of Hollywood's biggest stars. But starting in the 1950s, they had gotten involved in television as far as licensing and production. In 1958, they spent millions of dollars to buy the TV rights to Paramount's movie library. In the following year, they had actually bought Universal Studios' lot for over $11 million so they could use it to make their TV shows. That's where it got a little sketchy. In many cases, they were the company representing the actors and the company hiring the actors, negotiating deals with themselves, creating an obvious conflict of interest. So when they acquired Universal, that conflict was now too big, and they were legally forced to get rid of the talent agency and focus entirely on production. And MCA were the ones responsible for a lot of significant changes. I think it's interesting that they bought the store Spencer Gifts, who stayed with the company for the next 36 years. That's another great story that I talk about more in this other video if you're interested, but more importantly, they really developed the studio end by turning it into a popular tourist attraction. One of their first moves as the owners was to bring back the studio tours. They were actually started by Carl Laemmle himself shortly after the studios opened, but it was MCA that brought them back. They not only expanded the original Universal City, they also established the Orlando Studios and theme park in the 1980s. Another positive move by MCA was working with Steven Spielberg. In 1975, he directed Jaws. It was the first movie to gross over $100 million at the box office, and it's generally considered to be the first ever summer blockbuster. Not to mention these other hit movies that he made in the following years, many of which included these great marketable creatures like E.T. and Jurassic Park. Now, by the 1990s, the trend in the industry was that these movie studios were merging with other large companies. In 1989, Warner Brothers had merged with Time, and Columbia merged with Sony. I think of this as like when the teacher tells everyone to go find a partner, people start pairing up, and then all of a sudden, it's looking like you might be the one left without a partner. So you get nervous and frantically start searching for anybody that's standing by themselves. I'm getting anxious thinking about that, but I think that's what happened here. If MCA was unable to find a partner, all of their competitors would be so much bigger than them and they'd be left behind. So, the partner that they found in 1990 was Panasonic. Well, technically, it was Matsushita Electrical Industrial Company of Japan, named after the founder of the company, but they were mostly known for the Panasonic brand, and they have since changed their name to Panasonic, so that's what I'm gonna call them here. Panasonic was also nervously trying to find a partner because one of their biggest electronic competitors, Sony, as I said, had recently paired up with Columbia. And the idea behind these mergers was that they would be able to make movies and TV shows as well as the equipment needed to play those movies and TV shows. But it just did not work like they had hoped. It was a little forced in the first place. Plus, the Japanese economy and the falling sales of their electronics were complicating things, so just 5 years later, MCA was sold so they could better focus on those electronics, meaning Universal had yet another owner. And this one may be the least expected. In 1995, MCA, and therefore Universal, was bought by Seagram in a $5.7 billion deal. It's a bit of a strange one because Seagram was this Canadian-based company traditionally known for their alcoholic products. They were the makers of Captain Morgan and all these other liquor brands, but they had gotten involved in other unrelated businesses. Most notably, they were the biggest single shareholder of the chemical company DuPont, owning 24% of it. But they were now setting their focus on movie studios, so that year, in a highly criticized move, they sold their stake in DuPont for over $8 billion and used the majority of that money to buy MCA. Once it was completed, the name of the company was changed to Universal Studios, and over the next few years, they worked to divest their interest in beverage brands and increase their interest in music and movies. By the year 2000, a couple of things were happening. For one, the Universal movie division was now losing money. They had put out some disappointing flops, and they had gone into so much debt to create this massive media company that they couldn't really afford to have that happen. The other thing was that believe it or not, the consolidation of the media companies was getting even worse, exemplified by the biggest merger ever happening that year between AOL and Time Warner. Again, it's a thing where you have to try and keep up. So that year, Universal was sold to a French company called Vivendi. It was a complex $30 billion merger that created the world's second largest media company. Vivendi is another unexpected story. They started as a water company in the 1800s and evolved into this communications conglomerate that got involved in so many different things that they were actually given the nickname the Corporate Octopus. And you may also know them for their involvement in Activision Blizzard. There are still 2 more owners, but I think they're a little more straightforward, so I'm gonna go through them fast. In 2003, Universal was bought by General Electric. Vivendi saw this as a way to raise money to bring down their debt, while General Electric was already the owner of NBC, so obviously a movie and TV studio like this would be beneficial to them. Not to mention Universal already owned other TV networks like USA, so here it was all just working together. It created a separate entity called NBC Universal that was 80% owned by General Electric and 20% still owned by Vivendi, though that extra 20% was soon transferred over as well. Then, the final transfer of ownership, as of making this video anyway, happened in 2011 when NBC Universal was bought by Comcast. They not only provided cable to people, they were also the owners of some major TV networks like E! Entertainment. So again, it was all working together, and they even added to it when they bought DreamWorks Animation in 2016. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of Universal as far as what's been going on behind the scenes and all of the content that's resulted from it? I mean, these have been some major changes, and I do want to point out that Universal has truly lived up to that name. As we have seen, it has been owned by companies based in the United States, Great Britain, Japan, Canada, and France, and was established by someone who was from Germany. Also, I have to ask, what is your favorite Universal film? There are over 100 years of them to choose from, so I'd be interested in hearing about that. And any other thoughts you have about Universal, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.